A lot of unreality in the entire Fishtown scene. You couldn't get there really when we were there, and now you certainly can't, even though it still exists.
I live in Fishtown, which is about 4 miles north of LaConner, Washington, in an old fisherman's shack. There used to be a group of fishermen that lived along the Skagit River that were gill netters. And they had shacks, and they used to gill net at the mouth of the river. I thought that if I moved up into a place that was as isolated as Fishtown, that I could be alone with myself, and that I could learn to meditate.
Have you?
No, not in the sense that, not in the the Hindu sense of sitting, for 4 hours at a time in meditation, because I don't know the mechanics of it yet. But I think that what I am doing in Fishtown with my painting is a form of meditation. But the Skagit River has a sort of a presence about it. It's on the other side of where I live. There's a flock of snow geese and a bird sanctuary, and that's the only thing, if I don't have a radio on, that I hear are these snow geese cackling to each other.
The reason why we wanted to be in a place where we could have time to be more relaxed was because we were inspired by reading about, forest sages and Buddhist poet monks, that were always away from the urban centers. How did we all survive as artists? Yeah. Well, we were encouraged. That's one thing. I got encouragement to be an artist from my mom and dad at the moment that I displayed artistic inclinations. They put me in special classes for gifted, visually, gifted kids that like to draw. And Ibsen did the same for his kids. Exposed them to art, took them to Europe, brought artists in the home, because he thought they were a good thing to have around. So there was encouragement to be an artist. Times were easier so that you could be an artist without having to worry about getting food on the table and feeding your family. And then there were these great examples of committed artists in the community that you could look to for some sort of I call it astral apprenticeship. That's what I consider what I did. Since I didn't go to school and get a degree, I did an astral apprenticeship with the mystics of the Northwest, the Northwest mystics. And I got to the point about the age of 40 where there's nothing, I don't know what else to do. I woke up one day and things are changing. And I'm looking at everybody around me, and they've got families and kids. They've got responsibilities and jobs. And I'm plugging along with my art, and I'm surviving. but I'm not, I'm not getting ready for the end. And I just realized that, hey, maybe it's too late for me to try to retrain myself for something else. I was very impressed with Guy Anderson when I was first introduced to him by Glenn Turner. So I got drawn in, and as a result of getting drawn in, I got exposed to Guy Anderson's extremely simplified lifestyle. And it was elegant, and it was simple. I was completely smitten by that, and I wanted to emulate that kind of simplicity and grace. I met Guy Anderson before I met Morris. I became more of a fan of Morris after having spent a week with him at his home in Lolita. And I sort of gravitated more to his artistic style because of our. I blame this on an astrological affinity. We like fussy detail, and so I'm drawn to when Graves goes into detail. I like the detail in his paintings. A dog slept in the middle of the sidewalk, and Red Reynolds slept in the middle of the sidewalk, and he was a guy that had a garage on Main Street that he sold antiques out of. And he'd just open up the garage door, plop a lawn chair in front of it, and go to sleep in a wig, a woman's wig. And there he'd be all day long. And that was Red Reynolds. I met Betty Bowen, and we took a shine to each other. And she ended up visiting me a couple of times in Fishtown, and every time she came, she would, bring a basket of these hors d'oeuvres that she had picked up. I don't know if it was at Frederick and Nelson or at De Laurentiis in the market. Probably De Laurentiis. The fashion model thing, it wasn't that rare, to see a lady look like that. What was rare was to see a lady in furs up in Fishtown.
It wasn't just that this guy could paint a little bit or this guy could write a little posy. I mean, these people were already established, and I'm an architect, sort of fresh out of the army and fresh from seeing the world. But I was sort of a blank slate, and I was trying to figure out how do I fit into this, and carving kind of was the way I kind of got into the art side, and then. We lived a certain life out there that seemed to be true to itself and true to certain values. Not to say that we always got along, but we made an effort to get along, even in some pretty precarious situations. I arrived there in the spring of '72. I had just returned to Seattle from a year traveling around the world, and ended up the first night at some friend's house. I was looking up Arthur Greeno, and Charlie happened to be there, and he says, you want to go to Fishtown? And I didn't really have decided what I was going to do with my life at that point, but going to Fishtown sounded pretty good. So we got a Greyhound bus and hitchhiked from Mount Vernon into La Conner to the 1890s. And it was like no place I'd been before. The bartender was passing out mescaline. So the party went on till early morning, and I thought, well, this La Conner place it's a good place. And Charlie and I hiked in the dawn out to Fishtown, and that was sort of my introduction both to La Conner, Skagit Valley, and to Fishtown. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, and I became, after about a week, aware that someone was living in the basement and only came out at night, and it was Robert. And Robert and I became kind of fast buddies, and he says, well, hey, it's April, let's go out to Shai Shai. So Robert and I waited out there in the mud in April with a candle and sat in the mists, and I stuck around from that April through, I think, August at that point in time, basically living at Shai Shai, which was a huge turning point in my life. Robert was really good creating spaces, and that was a pretty good one. And there was a way a skunk could get in. And we'd be sitting there drinking cream sherry and whatever else, and playing music, and the skunk would come out, and he'd just kind of walk amongst us as if he belonged there, and we didn't bother him, and he didn't bother us. One of the mantras we had in Fishtown is, we're not a commune. Charlie self-dubbed and was dubbed mayor of Fishtown, which is a term that mayor doesn't quite qualify exactly what his role was, but he had been there the longest. He brought us there. He was the most established artist, and he was the most mystical, perhaps, of the personalities that were there. So in a sense, he was a leader, but not in the sense that Love Israel was. I mean, Charlie just had his way of looking at things, and the makeup of his viewpoint was certainly different than Paul Hansen's, which was certainly different than Robert's, and it was a very egalitarian group. Like Charlie's role, it's time to empty the shitter. And I remember one morning, just after coffee, there's a knock on the door, and Charlie and Ivory come in. And Charlie's got some bones in his hair, and I think he's wrapped a pelt or something around his head. And and Ivory had dropped some acid or something like that. And Charlie says it's time to empty the shitter, you know. So we gather everybody and shovel, and we go out, and that's what we do. There was no control over anybody else's life out there. And I think if you look at the group that was out there, we didn't probably had over-controlling parents or something, and we weren't looking for a father figure. We weren't looking for someone to tell us what to do, because we knew each bloody well what we wanted to do. I think we were strong personalities. And we were, I think, what might have separated us from leaders and followers in another commune, we were all either highly or pretty highly educated. One thing about the whole group around Laconia at the time, and Robert, Steve, and others were PhD dropouts. Art and Jenny Greeno were sort of around there. They both dropped out of master's or PhD programs. And so the libraries in Fishtown everybody had a really stellar library. Charlie in the occult and Hinduism, and Paul in the Chinese poetry, Steve, Middle Ages, you name it, Stephen had it. So it was a fascinating area right there with the libraries that each person had. So everybody had their own shtick already, and had gotten a good number of years of education under their belt. So I think that alone separated us from other communes where it might have been more leader and follower situation, and that never was the situation there. All things come to an end, and we went off into our lives, and it's pretty amazing how we have stayed the course as 20 young 30-year-olds. Not only was it serendipitous that the group of us came together, which I think were only a distillation of the group of people that all kind of came here in the early 70s. There was a large group, and there's a lot of us still here, surprisingly enough. Fishtown was, in a sense, sort of a distillation of it all. And then the amazing thing is that basically we're all still doing the same thing. Some of us well into our 60s at this point. So we've kind of lived it our whole lives, one way or another. 8 or 9 years ago, I was sitting at the table there with Bill, and it was a beautiful spring day. Sun was out, and I didn't think we even had the windows open. And I'm kind of reminiscing about the good old days of Fishtown, to be able to sit out there with a cup of tea and just be there with nature. And just then, both Bill and I looked out to the water, and there's a whole flock of ducks that are flying by about eye level, about 100 feet away. And Bill just smiled, and he said, "We're still out there."
And I can't say that we got our minds as the clear, unwritten slate, but we certainly had a much lower level of noise and trauma in there. The singing birds, I could sit there and I could tell the voices of maybe 12 or 15 different birds. I could hear the wind in the leaves when it was doing about 15 miles an hour or more, and I could tell 6 or 8 different kinds of trees just by the different rustles from how their leaves went in the wind.